Many kids really don't know what to say to their parents. Many kids are afraid if they have a problem to go to their parents and tell them, for fear of what they might say. Kids really look up to their parents, even though they down them all the time. How can they help but look up to them? And it's very hard to go to somebody that you look up to and say, look, I'm doing this. Like my parents, all the time, from the time I can remember, told me to come to them if I had a problem and tell them about it. But I never could bring myself to do it. As far as my parents went, and the people that I considered, quote, straight, unquote, I just didn't have any interest in communicating anything to them. So I didn't. Usually when a kid is 13 or 14, which is the age that most kids start using drugs, and lots of instances now it's much, much younger, but they have to have a group to identify with. And if their friends are using drugs, and they're not, many times they're rejected from the group. And that can really do a lot to a kid that old. I saw some people that seemed to be fairly open-minded people that were willing to talk, and people that were appealing to me. And they were, they were smoking grass. And I didn't see anything wrong with it except that it was against the law. At that time I felt very inferior to a lot of people. And it was in a way equaling myself to them. So I started smoking grass, and as time went on I met different people. And eventually I ended up taking acid, and eventually at one time or another taking just about every drug that you can find on the street.
Like when I first came in here, I was, really strung out, My best friend's down in college in Miami, and she doesn't do it very much. She was strung out when she was here. She's staying away from it pretty well. It's a hard thing to stay away from, though. It's just, once you do it, it's all over. Once you try it, there's no way back. I think that was my whole thing with heroin. I really liked having a nice rush. Because I know if I didn't get a rush, I would be very uptight, and want to do more. Like, I'm not sure why I do drugs. That's why I'm here, to find out why. Try to cope with it. Unless if it was something just too big to cope with. Because I don't want to be a junkie the rest of my life. I really don't. There's a lot of things about myself I still have to find out. I know I was a lot happier as a child than I was when I was doing drugs. But then there was something in between, from I guess the time I was about 12 to the time I was 15, that just, changed my mind about things. But I can remember being awfully happy about, little things. Because heroin doesn't really make you happy. It just kind of leaves a big void in time. And I didn't see a movie for 2 years, all kinds of things like that. Didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything. Just wasn't time.
What do you think you'll do if heroin were put in front of you right now?
Probably take it.
Would you think about it first at all?
I don't think so. I'm still not strong enough to fight it. But I don't think I'd go out looking for it right away.
You have persons here in this institution, second offenders, 10 years incarceration for being ill, crying out, needing help. 15 years, third offenders, crying out for help. Sick men, men with feelings, ambition, fear, love, tenderness, all of the other emotions, cast in here and literally cut off from life.
The traditional picture is of a disheveled, emaciated person in a squalid room, injecting a needle into his veins by the light of a bare, dangling light bulb. Drug abuse? Unfortunately, the problem is not that easily defined. Most people abuse some type of drug to some degree. Coffee, cigarettes, alcohol, narcotics. From childhood, we are oriented. If we don't feel great, we must take something that will make us feel that way. We abuse drugs by taking too many aspirins, too many stimulants, too many tranquilizers, too many barbiturates, too many drinks. Yet the only one who is condemned for overindulgence is the person who is physically dependent upon hard narcotics. Unlike the alcoholic, for whom there is help, the dependent drug abuser is left to fend for himself, completely alienated from and ostracized by society. Yet the only difference between alcoholism and drug dependence is the way in which the offender is viewed by society. The alcoholic has problems. The drug abuser is a criminal. In a very general sense, drug abuse may be said to be an attempt on the part of the user to feel differently than he does. He is allowed chemically to forget his frustrations, disillusionments, and inabilities to cope with society. For a while, he is filled with a sense of well-being and is at peace with the world. But when he comes down, he finds that the world has not changed into a better place. Only he has changed for a while. Regular use will probably lead to the user becoming psychologically dependent on the drug. Contrary to what he thinks, he can no longer cope with the problems and pressures of everyday living without escape. If he is using an opiate drug, he will also become physically dependent. At that point, the abuser must have the drug to stay well. Fear of withdrawal sickness motivates him to obtain his drug regardless of the consequence to himself or society. Dr. Sidney Cohen is director of the National Institute of Mental Health.
I feel that it isn't a drug problem, it's a people problem. I feel that many people are unhappy, have a low tolerance to frustrating life experience, that they are not confident that they can enjoy life without drugs, that they try to avoid difficulties. And so it's really, I think, a matter of educating, in the broader sense of the word, young people to the fact that you have to learn how to endure defeat, disaster, calamity, and this is how we grow, this is how we mature, by not evasion of these items, not escape, but living through them. And the same goes for this business of enjoyment. There are people, too many young people can only find enjoyment in chemicals. My point is that this retards them from learning how to enjoy this life.
This is Taylor Manor Psychiatric Hospital in Ellicott City.
Anybody ever tell you not to use drugs?
Oh, of course.
Before you started using them at all, I mean. Or was it
No,
a
I've
thing
heard
of-
your standard school rap,
Lies.
you know.
Yeah. What do you mean by
And
lies?
they are lies, man.
What do you mean?
The films you see in school are such fables that, like, you see the films of this dope fiend out on the street mugging his mother so he can get 6 cents, and all these horrible pictures are, and it's a bunch of crap.
You ever read the 1932 poster?
Oh yeah.
It's
Killing
it's a
marijuana.
farce, yeah. Killing marijuana. Beware the pusher on the street. You might slip it into your coffee,
Yeah.
into your cigarette. And this is what they believe.
My mother.
You think it would be different if I had told you the
listen,
truth?
My mother, just last weekend told me that smoking marijuana could cause birth defects. That's what she believes. She believes everything she reads. And like, so does everyone else, and it's all lies. Everybody presents such a closed-minded view about it. And it's like, when people get into drugs, they get very closed-minded about things. And they're very similar. Like the narcs who go into school and rap about how bad drugs are very similar to the people who say there's nothing wrong with drugs, because there are things wrong with drugs. There are lots of things wrong with drugs.
Few drug abusers are fortunate enough to receive treatment in such pastoral surroundings. But those who can afford it receive some of the best help available. About 50% of the adolescent patients at Taylor Manor are being treated for some form of drug abuse. In this rigid, controlled environment, intensive psychotherapy on a personal basis is balanced with group therapy. The ultimate goal is to make the abuser look inside himself, to see what it is he's running from, and to help him turn and face it.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't do that. You should let him fall in.
Wait a minute. When like a kid starts doing dope, like especially if you turn them on, you should explain to them that like you're taking a calculated risk of getting screwed up.
I've had a lot of bad trips. What happened? Well, you don't see monsters or you know, hallucinations, your Life magazine hallucinations and things like that. But you just see what's inside your head. You see the monsters inside your head.
Then you start thinking, you know, like, when are you going to come down, you know? Like, I've been up for so long.
Were you ever afraid you weren't going to come down?
Yeah, I was really afraid. And, like, I didn't see anything. It was all these head feelings.
Did you take acid again after that?
Yeah.
What?
I thought, well, it was just a setting. I just thought...
Or you thought you blamed it on the environment?
Yeah, I blamed it on that. So I said, well, I'll do it, you know, once more.
Was it a boner?
Yeah.
Oh, yuck.
What's a flashback like?
Well, it's just like this feeling hits you, like this intense fear and panic, just like that.
What happens?
You get really scared, you want to run around, you want to get out of wherever you are if you're closed in or anything.
Do you get colors and things?
No.
No?
It's just the
I
feeling.
get drag.
So I get colors, you know, sometimes just walking around.
What's really bad about it? What makes it so bad?
The intense fear, and you can't do anything about
Fear
it.
of what?
You don't know.
You don't know.
You
It's
don't
like,
know what the fear is.
and you don't even have to see anybody. You just, like, you could be in the middle of the ocean sailing in a ship alone, you know, and you could still just get this fear. It's unreal. It's so fantastically intense.
But you can't pin the fear down.
No, it's just super fear, paranoia.
How long do they last?
It depends. Like, sometimes they can last for a couple minutes, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes a few seconds. You can never tell. You don't know when they start, all of a sudden it just hits you. You don't know when they're going to stop either.
You think heroin's the ultimate?
It is the ultimate.
Yeah.
What do you think's the
I
ultimate?
think the ultimate is something like acid. I really got into these mind things.
I was into that
acid.
too for like a year and a half, and finally I just said screw it. You know, just screw it all. You know, I'm just going to do the acid, I'm going to dig it. Because you say, well, I'm going to try and develop a head, right?
No, that's not what I did. When I got on the acid, I did what was around me, and I magnified it, and I played games with it.
Yeah, but you never said to yourself, at any time I'm going to try and develop a head. Or I am a head. You never said that.
I thought
Of
of
course you
myself
said it
as-
to yourself, Greg.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you
You're a
did.
goddamn liar.
I am not. I mean, like, I never tried to develop myself into something like find a religion or find nirvana or anything like this.
I'm
I
not
just
talking about that, Greg.
I
I'm
just
talking
let it-
about your own head.
You
I
think
just
Greg's
let it-
playing tricks with himself?
I think everybody,
I think lying.
every person who starts taking drugs thinks that.
thinks
Everyone. I'm
Greg,
going to
you're
try
doing
and
it now.
develop
You're
a
sitting
head.
here and you're intellectualizing. You're
Every damn
taking
person who
everything,
takes a
you're
drug
rationalizing it and
takes
making it
drugs.
logical.
They sit at one time or another. They say, "Well, I'm going to get a head on my shoulders. I'm going to be cool."
In other words, this is a reason they use for taking the drug, is that what you mean?
But yeah, it is.
To get your head.
Yeah.
When I started out, of course I was trying to be cool, but once I got into something, you know, I
Oh,
started...
you were already cool, so you didn't have to try to be cool?
When I started out, of course I was trying to be cool, but once I got into it, I just let it, you know, I got into the trip, and then I started playing around with it. But I didn't try to develop myself any further, I just stagnated. You know, if the trip was bad, I had a bad trip.
There's
If the
also
trip was
limits,
good,
man.
I had a good trip,
I'll
you
tell
know.
you, this is going to sound like something for the TV show, but it's what I found to be the truth. Most of the people that have really, really good heads on their shoulder, there are a lot of people who do drugs that have good heads on their shoulders. But I know a hell of a lot of people who have either gotten into drugs and stopped them completely or never got into drugs at all, who have really, really dynamite heads. people who are really aware of what's going on around them, and people who really dig on life.
What are you
I
trying
know
to tell
people
Greg?
like that.
That you don't need drugs to get ahead.
Yeah, well, like, I realized that, because I've known a couple of people on the outside that are like that, but I didn't realize it.
Are you saying through drugs you can't develop a head?
As a matter of
No, not at all.
I was saying, you know, like,
But you don't need them to do it.
oh, well, Greg, you said, well,
you want to do the head drugs. You want to do the mind drugs. Well, why else would you want to do the mind drugs if it wasn't to develop a head?
because I dig getting up.
We know the reason for our addiction. Society does not know, does not choose to know, or if they do choose to know, they prefer to see it only in such a way that it would be acceptable by them. They tend not to want to see it because it has so many other ramifications. This is the thing that we have to change. Before there can be any real progress, truth must have to be established. The only way that truth can be established is that we ourselves must reassess.
This is the Maryland House of Correction in Jessup, Maryland. There are basically two reasons why these men are here for narcotics offenses. One reason is that society chooses to see the drug abuser as some sort of arch-fiend. The other, because of the lack of treatment facilities, there is little else the courts can do with him. Very little effort has been made to treat the abuser while he's confined, the feeling being that the agony of being here is enough to make him see the error of his ways. 3 years ago, a group of inmates, with administrative approval, formed a self-help group called SAND, Seekers After a New Direction. As a member of SAND, the drug abuser may begin to find understanding, acceptance, and himself.
With the communication gap existing between the parent and the child, what it is a complete lack of sincerity. It is a fear based on ignorance. When you look at them, in essence, ignorance. Who wants to take the first step? Society doesn't, or the spokesman for society. It is better because the public would prefer to hear what they're telling them. Men have built their platform on this, political careers on this, by playing on society's ignorance. And it is up to us, because we are the ones directly affected by this. This is the situation as it exists and as it will exist until something is done about it, something realistic, until honesty, it is approached with this in mind, with an honest attitude, a sincere attitude, wanting to learn of each other, to sit down and discuss it honestly, not wanting to hear what you have been conditioned to hear, to appease. And this is the situation that exists here. We seek to appease. So we tell them what they want to hear because they're not interested. And if they were interested, they would show their interest. I think it was Arthur Goldberg, when he was Secretary of the United Nations, made this statement. Said that if you would choose, or if you would have freedom for yourself, then you must guard that of even your worst enemy. For to neglect this duty is to establish a precedent that will soon reach into yourself. Now, taking this and looking at it in the context of drugs.
These prisoners find it easy to swear off drugs while serving time, but once returned to society, it becomes a different matter. Usually they return to the same environment, with the same pressures, the same friends, and the same inability to cope with life. It remains only a matter of time before they return to this or some other institution, because it's easier to condemn and to punish than to understand and treat them.
The ghetto has been crying out for years. Mothers, daughters, fathers, sons, literally wiped out because of drug addiction. Thrown into prisons, families broken up. nowhere to go. Hospitals closed. Only thing they understand in relation to the drug, he's a criminal. Lock him up.
I think that this is one of the gravest injustices that the state itself is perhaps guilty of perpetrating on the public when we talk about drugs. I have men calling me up on the phone, or their attorneys or their families, and say, Mr. Sklar, I'm a drug addict and I want to get off the street. I want to stop committing crimes that I have to do to finance my drug habit. Get me off the street. Get me into a hospital program this afternoon. I just want to give up. I want to get out and I want to try to make a go of it. And I'll say, but Mr. So-and-so, you know, there's no spaces available in the state of Maryland for treatment of addicts. Everything is filled to capacity. We only have 3 or 4 groups in the whole city of Baltimore that do have services, and these are all filled, and there's no more funds available, and they can't expand, and it's an impossibility. And then he'll come back and say, but Mr. Sklar, you know, you're telling me that I have to go back out tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning and either shoplift at one of the stores downtown or burglarize some shop tonight or break into someone's house tomorrow night in order to get the money to pay for my $50 a day habit. You're telling me to go out and commit a crime? And I'd say, look, I can't do anything. I personally can't create the opening tomorrow. This has to come from the state, and then I have to explain to them the budgetary process, where the executive is the one who proposes the money, and the legislature can only reduce it. It cannot increase the budget request from the executive. And frankly, that this just wasn't provided for in this year's budget. The legislature, I think, was willing and able to do this. The necessary money was not forthcoming in the budget request from the executive, and therefore we have this tragedy that we're telling people who want to stop perpetrating a crime this day or the next day or for the next 5 or 10 weeks or years that we can't do anything about it. In effect, the state is authorizing crimes to be committed.
Until 3 years ago, there was no treatment program available for the dependent drug abuser in Baltimore. The heroin abuser had no alternative but to eventually be ground up by the wheels of justice. About that time, Dr. Emmett Davis, noting successful treatment with methadone in New York, began administering the synthetic narcotic to a few heroin users in his office. It seemed to work, and from that evolved the present Man Alive program.
The basic philosophy of the Man Alive program is that, first of all, it works with hardcore addicts, people who have been using drugs for 5 years or longer. And people who have demonstrated that they are unable to stay away from drugs, even if they're drug-free at a certain point, they generally go back and start using drugs again. Our idea is to maintain them indefinitely on a synthetic narcotic methadone, which allows them to function normally as anyone else in the community. It allows them to work, to be with their families, and to be able to stay away from using narcotics, principally heroin, on the streets. There's some studies now which are tending to show, perhaps, and are suggesting that long-term addiction does something to somebody's metabolism, and that by being clean, the person is not really functioning normal, that he's not feeling well. And if this is true, it would begin to explain why 98% of the people coming out of Lexington go back and start using drugs again. They're drug-free, they're not physically addicted to narcotics, but they go back and use drugs again. And the question is why? And part of it is being suggested now that they're using drugs because they aren't really feeling well at all, that they are uncomfortable, that the only thing that makes them comfortable is narcotics, methadone being one narcotic. There's no detoxification around here. When someone comes on this program, it's with the understanding and acceptance of the fact that they will be maintained indefinitely on methadone, with no attempt to get them away from their methadone habit as a result. And the difference between this and other programs is that other programs do make an attempt to get people off of narcotics and off of methadone too, and get them drug-free. We approach drug addiction and look at it as a contagious disease which is passed from user to non-user. If you ask an addict, how did you get started on drugs? He'll say, a friend introduced me to drugs. No one starts off using narcotics thinking he's going to get addicted. Right. And then all of a sudden he wakes up one morning and he's got a habit, and he has to feed the habit. But he hasn't done it necessarily because he has some kind of lacking. He's used it because he's enjoyed the effect. Right. And now suddenly he's going to have to pay for it.
Project ADAPT began as a branch of Man Alive in conjunction with Providence Hospital and was designed to serve the black community more effectively. The largest of the Baltimore programs, ADAPT treats some 700 drug-dependent persons.
The overall purpose of the Providence Hospital Project ADAPT is to take the drug abuser, that is the narcotic addict, the heroin addict, the amphetamine and barbiturate addict, from the street, from a life of crime, and into the care of a general hospital. We have a three-faceted program for this purpose: detoxification, abstinence or no drugs at all, and temporary maintenance in regard to narcotics addiction when detoxification fails. In abstinence, the patient is not given any drugs but put under urinary surveillance. We usually take urinary samples at least 3 times a week, or we may take it on demand. And we use this as a method of telling whether or not the person is using narcotics or similar drugs. If the person is on abstinence, we insist that he comes in at least 1 hour a week for psychotherapeutic measures. We don't use the strict psychotherapeutic measures, but we do try to develop a pseudo-family type atmosphere so that the patient would feel a sense of belonging to the project. And we usually refer to the patients as members. In detoxification, if the psychiatrist would so decide, the patient would be given medication according to his addiction. If it's heroin addiction or narcotics addiction, he would be given methadone, and he would be given a sufficient amount of methadone to satisfy his withdrawal symptoms. After he had been made physiologically comfortable, then the medication would be gradually reduced, and he would be continued until his medication level would be on 0. And in fact, we like to try to continue the patient even after he has received 0 methadone with plain Tang, until we feel that physiologically he's comfortable, and then comfortable enough psychologically to be told that he's off drugs. As far as temporary maintenance is concerned, we would put the patient on a level dose of methadone until such time as we felt he would be ready to be detoxified. We have as an overall philosophy the idea of detoxifying all individuals. We do not wish to maintain people. However, we will maintain people who will not be able to detoxify or tolerate abstinence.
Last summer, Johns Hopkins opened the Drug Abuse Center. Like Project ADAPT, it has the ultimate goal of helping the person to become completely drug-free. Unlike either of the other programs, the clinic also serves as a research project from which it is hoped more effective help for the dependent drug user might develop.
The Drug Abuse Center at Johns Hopkins was developed 14 months ago at the request of the local East Baltimore community to serve the narcotic addicts in the center of the city. In addition to that, it was established also to provide services to drug abusers of other kind, not just narcotic addicts, but users of LSD and amphetamines and so on, and not just for the center of the city, although we are held to giving priority to our local patients. The cardinal idea of this program is to have a broad treatment facility for a broad range of drug abuse related disorders, not just to be restricted, for instance, to narcotic addicts, and not just to serve with one modality like methadone treatment. What we want to do is to use all the known and validated treatment methods for all types of drug abuse. Then an additional thought, an additional plan is to develop new methods of treatment through intensive research, to develop large-scale education in the problems of drug abuse. That means, for instance, that we would train other physicians that we would train teachers, lawyers, ministers in the problems of drug abuse so that they, for instance, can spot a youngster. Furthermore, we would like to go out into the community and serve the public at large with education.
In Baltimore, where there are an estimated 15,000 people dependent upon opiate drugs, there are treatment facilities for only 1,000. To be certain, not all abusers are seeking help. Probably only a few realize they even need help. But those who do should have some other option than to continue until they are jailed or possibly die from an overdose.
I think that if you give kids the basic facts about drugs, the facts that are known, not make up ones because we don't know some.
Information isn't available to
right.
schools.
And just like
It's
scientists
there, but
don't want to make statements because they aren't sure yet. So just give the kids exactly what's known, present them with the problem, say scientists don't know all the answers, and then let them make up their mind.
The parents and kids, I'm not saying parents are perfect, I'm not saying I know kids aren't perfect. I mean, like, they listen to what they want to hear. And in a way, and one of the ways the kids have been messed up with it is like, with the films they've been presenting, they've been showing all scare tactics. And even like the guy from Man Alive, he goes, I'm right, you know, he gave you the attitude, I'm right, you know, you can't knock me down.
That's why you've got to present both sides. You've got to present both sides because if you say that, if you show them both sides, they're going to consider both sides.
A lot of it is that the kids aren't represented with the proper information.
That's true.
And they feel like they're being treated like children. You know, like with that one police movie we saw, they played it, you know, they made the kids feel like they were little, you know, they were 5 years old.
Too many people just have one side, like the police department. I'm sure there are many policemen that know everything that there is to know about drugs, and some don't know anything. They just know the law. So I think that our society is making an attempt now. They're finally realizing that it's not the stereotype person who takes drugs, and it isn't the stereotype pusher, and that drugs are available and the prices aren't that high. You can get marijuana for $3 to $5. You can get even sometimes less. I think that when you give parents this information, you give students this information, and everyone who's concerned, then it will be a lot easier to communicate with one another and to try to solve the problem as to how to prevent kids from getting hurt from drugs and how to just solve the overall problem.
Formal education, information should begin very early in grade school, perhaps as low as kindergarten, where you teach a youngster you don't put everything into your mouth that you get your hands on. And information about the drugs of abuse should continue right throughout the entire school period. But there's something more needed than just information, because the decision to take drugs is not a rational one. Young people will do dangerous things, and if we tell them a drug is dangerous, that won't deter them. So we need a number of other aspects to drug education. We have to have adults develop a new respect for drugs which they can transmit to their children. And by drugs I include alcohol here. We have to recognize that there isn't magic pills for every human ailment, suffering, or frustration. This is something that the mass media is going to have to help us on. And we have to give young people a goal in life which is far more important than any drug state. I feel that one of the troubles with our present drug epidemic, if you want to call it that, is that it's due to the purposelessness of many youngsters' lives. If they don't feel any relationship with any important goal, they have no great self-respect for themselves, perhaps. And the development of a viable purpose is tremendously important.
Normally when a person sees pot, it's already cut up, but if there are people around the world who do grow marijuana, and this is what it looks like. And, well, I sort of have what you might call a reefer kit, and Indian marijuana kind of looks like this. It's a greenish type, and once it's cut up, it's ground kind of fine into very small leaves. And what people do is they take cigarette paper, tip in as much grass as they want, and then roll it. And what you have to make sure is that air can flow through. So they open it at one end, just like a regular cigarette, and then twist it at the other end where you might inhale it. And then, you know, you can light it and smoke it just like a regular cigarette, except it has to be inhaled for the effect.
Anyone have any questions? Teresa?
Some people say that when you are around people that are smoking marijuana, you know it's marijuana because it has a sickening sweet smell. Is this true?
Who knows? You know?
Yes, it has a sweetish odor.
To date, little has been done to combat drug abuse. But through education programs like those conducted by the Baltimore Public Schools, youngsters may be made aware of the effects of drugs. But at best, drug education has been sketchy, taught by teachers unfamiliar with the subject and armed with emotion rather than scientific information. The obstacle is communication. Today's sophisticated young men and women are well educated and painfully aware of the world around them. Time-honored euphemisms, tainted logic, and double-standard arguments are meaningless to them. The most positive point of this new drug education program is that there is no attempt at moralization or persuasion. The teenagers are given the facts as they exist and as they are known. The decision is up to them.
Maybe some of you have this information already.
It might be habit forming, but I'm pretty sure it's not addicting. And you know, this is kind of like a kick. And it's not a thing like you pick up a cigarette, I need a cigarette, or like, you know, you feel that you need some grass every so often. It's maybe you're very depressed and you might need something to pick you up. Or you might be at a party where everybody is tripping off and this is the thing to do. But I don't think it's either. It's either habit forming or addicting. I'm sure it's not addicting.
You're sure it's not addicting, but you're not sure about habituation. All right, who else wants to comment on it? Okay.
Well, LSD, well, right now it's going out of use most of the time. You know, not many people use it anymore. And people want to go into bigger things and have longer trips and, you know, stronger trips. But there's one thing that's the matter. You can't stop a bad trip. And I think maybe more people would even be using the drug if you could stop a bad trip. Because, you know, you might do something pretty bad.
Is it true that marijuana leads to heroin? It's a very good question. What do you think about that? Who has some ideas on the matter, all right?
Marijuana isn't as strong as heroin, and once your body becomes adjusted to that, then you're going to want something stronger, so you're going to move on to heroin.
From what we found out, is this correct information? Susan?
I don't think so. I don't think your body ever really wants marijuana because it's not physically addicting. So I think marijuana can lead on to heroin, but it doesn't have to. That's psychological.
One of the few research efforts aimed at discovering more effective means for helping the dependent drug abuser is being carried out by the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in conjunction with the Friends of Psychiatric Research. Work is conducted exclusively with paroled narcotics offenders, enabling a maximum amount of discipline to enforce rules and regulations. Violations may mean return to prison. As a group is paroled to the new program, the men are split into two groups involving different approaches. One group is treated on an outpatient basis, subject to daily urine checks, close supervision by parole officers, and they must report once or twice weekly for group therapy sessions. The other half is moved into a resident halfway house upstairs named the Coleridge House after Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was himself an opium eater. The men will live here for 2 months undergoing a program called Psychedelic Therapy. The period is marked by intensive psychotherapy aimed at trying to penetrate the defenses and walls the individual has erected around himself. The period is also spent orienting the abuser for the climax of the program, a 14-hour LSD trip. Under the expertise of the therapist, the abuser is guided through his mind in an effort to find himself.
Psychedelic therapy is a highly specialized form of brief, intensive psychotherapy. By brief, I mean a period of approximately 6 weeks. By intensive, we mean intensive self-scrutiny with frequent interviews
and mobilization of affect or feeling. Psychedelic therapy involves three general phases or parts. The first is the preparation, during which time the patient and therapist in a concentrated manner go over the patient's difficulties in living, past and present, his fears, his aspirations, his conflicts, his concept of life and death and religion, and so on. The second phase is a regression, chemically induced with LSD 25, with loosening of defenses and dissolution of the ego or the usual sense of self or identity. The third part is that of working through, where new discoveries are sorted out, new ways of seeing, reacting to the world are tested, and hopefully maladaptive defenses are completely discarded. The drug addict is an alienated individual, alienated not only from people in general and the world at large, but alienated from himself, really out of tune with his own feelings, his own fears. There are definite stages of an LSD session. The first 2 or 3 hours are generally of a physical, psychodynamic nature. And then after 3 to 5 hours, this is the peak moments of the LSD session when the psychedelic or ego loss experience will occur, if it's going to occur. If the individual is properly prepared and he's trusting and open enough, complete dissolution of the ego will occur. During the time, there doesn't seem to be an observable ego experiencing this. In other words, the individual, while he's in this ego lost state, is not aware of his usual sense of identity or his usual self experiencing this, but afterwards he remembers the experience, although often is incapable really of conveying it with words to someone else. More often than not, one's attitude towards death, for example, is changed. One feels that physical death really is not the end, but the beginning, for he has experienced death of the ego, and after this he feels that bodily death really is not the end of life, but perhaps even the beginning. Often after the ego loss experience, subjects report feeling closer to their fellow man and closer to the world in general, and a greater affinity or relationship with the cosmos at large, a feeling of brotherhood of all man, and frequently one will say all is one after having had this experience.
And so over a period of time, it gets so that you don't be taking the drug to get high. You be taking the drug mainly to stay, keep yourself from being sick. And after you go through this particular stage, you can sit down and talk with people, but you would tend to throw the conversation away from you personally. You could sit down, you could talk about politics, everyday living, love, life, pursuit of happiness, anything but you personally.
Well, actually, how do you think that you could get close to me, or when I'm taking drugs and I'm feeling superior over you anyway? We could talk, but I'm in the back of my mind. I feel I'm superior over you. You don't know what you're talking about. And if you really want to talk about my problem with drugs, I'll listen to what you got to say. But you're not the person that really can help me, or you're not. I don't feel as though that you really mean enough to help me. I think that you were looking down on me from the beginning. And if you could erase this feeling, then maybe I would listen to what you have to say. But you have this feeling of people looking down on you, all people. When you're addicted to drugs, and it's a feeling of inferiority. Like I had maybe fired 2 or 3 hours before going to someone's home. There's several people there. I was there, but to me, I was the only one there. These people here, just here, they're not even speaking my language. You understand what I mean? You try to make conversation, but There's only one thing in your mind, you know, is where am I going to really get this next shot from, you know? These people are really getting on my nerves, you know, and they're boring the hell out of me, you know. And the only comfortable place that I could be would be amongst other drug addicts. Inwardly, he's really crying out, help me, help me, help me, you know, like it's a real small help, you know. But then after a period of time, it begins to grow, you know, you begin to holler a little bit louder. But being around people, you feel like I'm with these people, but I don't really belong here, you know. This is what am I here for anyway? You know? I'm only fooling these people, you know.
It's hard when you're addicted to really let yourself go, because you know you have a problem, and you take your problem too. If I was to sit down and tell a guy that I can't express these 3 words, I love you, and mean it, could my fellow man sit down and tell me why I can't express it? Even if he was telling me the way he felt, I didn't want to hear it. I really wouldn't want to hear it, because I couldn't do it. After coming through here and talking to my therapist for a period of 33 days, this came natural. This was part of me anyway. All I had to do was get drug-free. Then I could sit down and talk to anybody and say these same 3 words and really mean it.
These people really, really care about me, you know, as a human being, you know.
The people in the field, the doctors, the sociologists, the particular individual drug programs that have been operating are all cognizant of what is needed in the area of drug abuse, and that the reliance on the enforcement aspects of drugs has not been the most effective, nor will it be the most effective approach to the overall problem. That reliance is now needed in the field of education, in the field of treatment and rehabilitation. It's not the problem of the experts. I think they're aware. It's the question now of convincing some of the upper echelons in government that you just don't take a drug addict and knock them over the head, throw them into a cell, and turn the key and throw it away and say stay there 5 years. Because first of all, we just don't have enough facilities, even in the correctional system in the state of Maryland, just to house these people. That's number one. Number two, what you're doing in effect is just warehousing these individuals who are drug abusers, who are apprehended, convicted, and then sentenced to prison. You're warehousing them. You're postponing their readjustment to society. And all you're doing in effect is saying, stay here for 3, 4, 5 years, and when you come back, then go back on drugs.
The state has been slow to recognize its role in the change from punitive to rehabilitative treatment. The dependent drug abuser stands today where the mentally ill stood 50 years ago. Though slow in coming, change is starting to appear. Last year, the state of Maryland allocated $421,000 for the various drug programs in the state. This year, a total of $1,500,000 has been budgeted to fund existing programs and to develop new ones. One is a statewide program of individual and family counseling and treatment programs for adolescent abusers to be established specializing in amphetamines, barbiturates, marijuana, and LSD.
We're taking a brand new approach in the state of Maryland as far as the drug addict is concerned, and that's why I like to not any longer call him the addict, because when one talks about the drug addict, one thinks of the criminal element who's on drugs. You think of it as a very anti-social, penalistic type of thing. We don't. We want to look at this as the patient. So we would talk rather than about the drug addict, the person who is drug dependent. Now with this new look in mind, then our approach is not to incarcerate him, but to rehabilitate him. In order to rehabilitate him, then you have to provide for him the proper physical and mental facilities whereby he can overcome his problems. Now what the state is doing overall is trying to develop a comprehensive plan whereby we can put the man who has drug-dependent problems. When the judge says to him, you have these problems, he will have an alternative rather than to put him into jail. And as I say, the Drug Abuse Authority is now developing a master plan whereby they will come up with their recommendations for these types of facilities. When they do that, we will do everything possible to implement them. In the interim, we're doing everything possible to keep the 3 existing programs in Maryland going, viable. That is, Man Alive, ADAPT, and the Johns Hopkins programs. We have said that we will treat, and we do treat, and we believe this patient is primarily a sick patient, sick mentally and sick physically. Now, once we've established that, it's up to us now, and up to you, to get to the public and to translate this information into everyday terms. In this regard, we have set up a community program where we have 3 members going into the community and telling the people in the community about these programs, and telling the people the man who is on drugs is not a criminal by nature. He's a sick person. He should be thought as a sick person. And once you're dependent on the drugs and you're hooked on the drug, you have to have help to get off of it. You can't do it yourself. It just isn't going to go away if you forget about it. And that's, again, where we need the proper programs at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, and you need to eliminate the supply. But burying your head in the sand and saying it's going to be cyclical won't work. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. For every person on it today, if he doesn't receive help, he will stay on it, and he will effectuate 2 new people from being on it. So you'll then have 3, and this is a multiplying effect. So that's only going to get worse, not better, unless there's intervention.
Education, research, and treatment of drug abuse is going on, and old attitudes are being changed. But we are still more occupied with treating the symptoms rather than discovering the cause of the illness. We've tried ignoring the drug abuser, yet he didn't go away. We've tried ostracizing the drug abuser, yet he persists. We've tried punishing the drug abuser, yet he doesn't change. Perhaps it's time we tried helping him. But we have so far to go, and so few who can hear the crying.